Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. And today we are going to be discussing agroecological living labs, sustained participation of involved actors with a particular emphasis on women farmers. And today, the webinar is going to be moderated by Alyssa here, who is an associate professor at the University of Gothenburg and a partner of the PrAEctiCe project. Before we also start, I would like to say that the webinar has been put together by the PrAEctiCe project, an Horizon Europe program funded by the European Union. So Alyssa, you can take the floor. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Blessing. And a very warm welcome to everybody who's here today with us. And I guess the goal is to start exploring a bit the crucial role of women in agroecological practices and everything from food security to climate resilience and how women are helping drive economic development across the African continent. And as we know, women are a backbone of agriculture in many, many African countries, and they also face a lot of systematic barriers that are hindering their participation in decision making, access to resources, leadership, positions. And so our seminar today is a really good chance to bring together a really distinguished panel of experts who can share various insights and some of their research, as well as their experiences with living labs and how those can be used to create more inclusive and gender sensitive agroecological systems. I think it's a really great opportunity today to look a bit about the participation of women in agroecology and how we can ensure that in future, and how women can be better supported through the project results that we generate both in the PrAEctiCe project and in all the other projects that are being featured today. And I think the most important is just to always come back to how can we empower women to become leaders and change makers in the movement, and continue this forward trajectory that we've started with a lot of very interesting projects. I'm looking forward to hearing more about all of those. And so in that regard, I guess I'd like to welcome some of our speakers and just give me a few minutes of your time so I can introduce everybody properly. And then we'll go on and ask some questions and have a nice discussion. I guess I should start maybe with Janet Maro, who's with the PrAEctiCe Project and is the Executive Director of Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania for the last 15 years. And together with her team, she's actually grown SAT to be one of the leading organizations in agroecology and organic agriculture in Tanzania. And SAT won the Africa Agroecology Award for the best civil society organization. That's pretty impressive. I'd like to say that Janet is very passionate as well about women's engagement and empowerment. Janet, we've obviously met before because we're working in the project together, but you've really made sure that SAT projects have activities that are enabling to women and participation in farming, livestock, and business, and all sorts of other things. So very warm welcome, Janet. Thank you for joining us today. Very appreciated. And I guess I'll go ahead and introduce some of the other lovely ladies who are here today. We have with us also Gertrude Atukunda. Oh, and man, sorry, we got Amos as well. I shouldn't, I shouldn't. We got Gertrude as well, who's got a PhD in sociology at Makerere University. And she's a socioeconomist working with the National Agriculture Research Organization in Kijansi, Uganda. And she has over 20 years experience conducting socioeconomic research with a focus on agroecology and understanding the livelihoods of fish farmers, fishing communities, and aquaculture. And I've also had the pleasure of meeting you, Gertrude, as part of our project here. And I just want to say I really love that you're so passionate about gender analysis and the promotion of women's empowerment and all the various projects you've worked on that do everything from economic analysis to markets to consumption dynamics and farmer extension services. You've got a really impressive portfolio of projects. So very warm welcome. Welcome. So we have a missing person, I think, still with Susan Andiamo. I can just briefly introduce her in case she does decide to join in a bit. She's the Chief Fisheries Officer at the Kisumu East Sub-County at the Department of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries in Kenya. And she leads various projects with farmers that are very pro-women and youth, and is interested also, obviously, in building capacity in agroecology for agriculture and fisheries. So hopefully she will be able to log in a bit here. If not, well, we'll move on, and we have another wonderful presenter here joining us from Cameroon, who's Tata Ngome Precillia, and she's an agroeconomist working, or an agronomist, sorry, working with as a senior socioeconomic researcher for the Institute of Agricultural Research. And her work focuses on the politics of agriculture and natural resources, as well as food security and nutrition, innovation systems and climate change. And she's very much focused on gender, obviously, as a theme in her work, and has been leading the CANALLS project. Tell me if I didn't pronounce that correctly, but that's the CANALLS project, where they are testing various agroecological practices with rice and cocoa, coffee, maize, and cassava. Did I pronounce that right? let me know. Here. Precillia?
Yeah.
Did I?
Yeah, it is well. Thank you very much, Alyssa.
Nice. I'm pretty sure we have a partnership in the practice project with that, with CANALLS. I did see something about that recently. So yeah, so welcome. Thank you for joining us. And
Thank you.
I will love to introduce our, I'm sorry, Amos, originally I think it had been Sylvia or somebody who was presenting, but Amos, I don't want to leave you out here. So let's introduce Amos Nakmino, who is a lead researcher at the FIDEP Foundation in Ghana. And he's involved with the CIRAWA project, which is focused on agroecological solutions for resilient farming in West Africa. And that is a 16 partner project from 9 countries that, as I understand, is being implemented in 4 West African countries: Cape Verde, Ghana, Senegal, and the Gambia. And that project is very focused on the valorization of agroecological waste, agro waste for fertilizer production, and as well as some saline soil reclamation, seed development, soil fertility, water, crop management practices. I'll let Amos, you can tell us a lot more when we start in on the project here. So Amos, welcome, very welcome. I just want to make sure you're there. Yes. Good. Amos, are you there? We can't see you. No video.
Yes, that's correct. So sorry, I may have to, Blessing, I may have to violate one of your ground rules because I'm actually on the road right now. So you may experience some noise in the background, but I'll try as much as possible to keep it minimized. But everything you said is correct. Thank you, Alyssa.
Nice. Well, safe travels. We'll keep you stand by. No worries. That's good.
Thank you.
That's great. So, yeah. So the topics today that we want to focus on living labs and how women's involvement in agroecology. What some of the challenges, and maybe we could just start with Janet. Would you like to go first and just talk a little bit about what we've been doing in this practice project and some of your perspectives on women in agroecology within the practice living labs?
Yes, thank you very much, Alyssa, and fellow speakers today. As I've been introduced, I'm Janet Maro. I work with Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania, and we are part of the practice project. And in particular, with Living Labs, we have the Living Lab 3, which is based at Morogoro in Tanzania. We are in the eastern part of Africa, and our Living Lab is in a center which is off the grid. So you will see that our Living Lab has an integrated system whereby we have local chicken, we have fish, and then we have crops. So it's integration of livestock, which are poultry, fish, and then we have the crops, which currently we have vegetables in the fields. And for us as Living Lab 3, but also in this system, you know, in the African context, small livestock like chicken, if you look across all the African cultures, you'll see that chicken are for women, and those livestock which really empower women. So it's very nice that we have poultry as a livestock which is for women, and culturally in most African societies. Hence, working with chicken means it's a property of mostly women. Because if you look, for example, in most pastoral communities, you find the cows are mostly for the men, and women don't really have so much access to the cattle. But chicken are a livestock of the woman. But also, yes, with fish and the fish ponds, the wastewater we use in the fields where we have crops, and the crops are vegetables like spinach. We intercrop with onions in the agroecological system. So you will see that vegetables such as spinach, but also the using of water from the fish ponds, which is a practice of recycling or reusing water, is a practice which can be very well adopted in the setting of a household, especially in the kitchen, with water recycling and water usage. And when you talk about the kitchen, again, in traditional African societies, you see that, again, the rural woman, it's a role that is mostly by the women. So in this way, our practice project and for the Living Lab here, there are these aspects whereby we show and through the research and the practices which are done, that these things which are already traditionally for women, with technology and techniques on water recycling and water usage, but also incorporation of the droppings from the livestock, feeding the fish, and then using the water in the crops, is something that also women farmers can do easily in their home settings. And if they're able to use these practices, they'll be able to improve. We saw with the first data from the harvest of vegetables that the vegetables that were where we used water from the fish ponds, that the vegetables grew much better. And also we saw that the fish that were fed with droppings from the with droppings from the poultry houses, the fish that were fed with droppings from the poultry, from the chicken, they grew longer than the fish that were not fed with droppings from the chicken. So we see that the chicken droppings have they help the growth of fish. And then also we see that the water from the fish ponds has a positive contribution towards the growth and development of crops. And this is something that now we encourage more women also to see, and also we support with training and capacity building, so they're able to be able to practice in their homes and in their farms. And also another aspect is that in the project we try to intentionally have the participation of women by making sure that whenever there is a training, that at least the female farmers, but also female professionals are informed, and they also have the opportunity to be able to participate in the training and capacity building opportunities that are taking place in this project. But also for us as an organization, since we have a very transformative approach you'll notice that apart from me, who is a woman and director of the organization, we have my colleagues Antusa, Angelina, who are also women, very capable, very eager, and doing well and supporting this project together with our male colleagues. And we are able to to implement this project very, very well and very successfully. Also Keta, I forgot to mention Keta as well. So we are actually majority women of us supporting in this project at SAT, and together with our male colleagues, we are able to make it happen. And also we are very fortunate that we have the participation of women farmers as well, who see that this project is something for them as well, and that there are aspects that they can learn and be able to implement in their places. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing a bit about what has been going on in the practice. And we had such a nice time. You hosted us in Dar es Salaam last year, and it was just such a great experience to see the project and to see what you've been doing. So really exciting. And thank you for sharing. And maybe we could get Gertrude. Would you like to go next? Would you like to give us a bit of background about what you've been doing, so we have a bit more information about the Living Labs and the project?
Thank you very much, Alyssa and colleagues online. Yeah, my name is Gertrude. As you've heard, I work at KAJANSI, and I participate in the Living Lab that is taking place here at KAJANSI. I should have planned to show you the setup, but maybe some of you have visited, I'm not very sure. When we started this experiment, as I want to call it, it is something that is really new, and what has been going on step by step, every bit of step has been documented properly. We have had visitors coming to see the Living Lab, and we have also made it a point to make sure that we host also groups of women to come and see the Living Lab. And that's where my focus of discussion is. The important thing we have noticed, and what the visitors have noticed or mentioned, that the setup looks a little bit costly and not something that the rural work persons can adopt. So efforts are going on to make sure that after going through all this experimentation, then we can devise means of promoting the lab on farm, but probably at a scale that can be afforded by probably the middle level income farmers. So we see that this is a very good venture that is providing lessons for us to be able to promote and for adoption on farm. The key, of course, is an integration of fish and vegetables. And why vegetables? We know that in our African setting, vegetables form an important recipe in many households. But the problem or the challenge is that the growing of the vegetables is really dependent on seasons. So you find vegetables are readily available during the rainy season, but come dry season like it is right now, January, Feb is really quite a bit dry in Uganda. So finding vegetables, it can be a problem unless people venture into growing the vegetables in places that are not really allowed, like wetlands. So the comments have been that this is a very good venture because it assures the consumers access to vegetables all year round because of the integration and the availability of water all the time. I think I will reserve the rest of the points I thought about in terms of how to integrate women and make sure that women fully participate in the experiments, because we have been capturing all the concerns and comments made by the visitors who come to visit our living lab. I could leave it at this for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have seen the Living Lab and really enjoyed visiting as well in Kijansi. It was fabulous. And what you're doing is really interesting. And as you say, maybe some of the experimental work that's going on, or the design was aimed at doing some experimental work, but scaling it down to middle income farmers is a really great way to move forward with some of the outreach. It's really interesting, and especially seeing how women can get more involved as well. So it's really, really valuable what you're doing. Thank you for sharing. And I'll come back to you with some nice questions, because it sounds like there's a lot more to share about what's been done in Kijansi. So how about we thank you and move on to Precillia. Would you like to give us an overview of what goes on in your living labs?
Yeah, so I was saying that CANALLS stand for Driving Agroecological Transition in the Humid Tropics of Central and Eastern Africa through Transdisciplinary Agroecology Living Labs. So within the framework of the CANALLS project, 8 agroecology living labs have been put in place. And these living labs, we have 4 in DRC, which is in Congo. They are in the 4 living labs in Congo. We have Bunia, we have Bega, we have Bunia, Bega, Kabare, and Uvira. And each living lab has a focal crop. Like for the Bunia living lab, the focal crop is cocoa. For the Bega living lab is coffee associated with trees. And then the Kabare living lab is coffee with intercropping with annual crops. And the Uvira living lab is rice with cassava. Then we go over to the living lab in Burundi, where we have the Bujumbura and the Geita living labs. And the living lab in Burundi, we have maize with legumes, and the Geita living lab will have coffee with intercrops with beans, soybeans, peas, and cover crops. In Cameroon, is focused on cocoa, and the living lab in Rwanda, which is the Kamonyi living lab, is focused on the cassava and legumes. So when we look at these living labs, the activities of the living lab as a whole and the focal crops, they are very specific to the focal are very specific to women's activity, gender sensitive. Because if you look at cocoa and coffee, they are not women's crops generally. They are crops that are mostly cultivated by men. So to this effect, when we analyze the percentage of women in the living labs, we see that only 19% of women are involved in living lab activities all across the 8 living labs in the 4 countries. And then in the living labs, we establish the co-creation activities. And some of the activities established we have a couple of co-creation activities that were developed within a CANALLS project. And the activities were more on a testing of different trials of biofertilizers and the appropriate application of chemical fertilizers, and then shade management. And they also use, they also have in the case of Rwanda, they use they're doing the urine test for food crops. So all the activities we are testing different activities within each of the living labs, and all the activities are being tested. Some of them are not very sensitive to women. They are not able to be applied by women. So the living lab activities, for the moment, we have also minister or other activities on collecting data and working along the value chain. But so far for the co-creation activities, we are not very gender sensitive. And then we try to analyze why these activities are not gender sensitive. So women are not generally involved in this activity, even though the living lab is focused on cassava with legumes. which are women crops, but the activities that were set up for the population were not adaptable to women. So the whole experimental setup was not adaptable to women. And then we also noticed that women were not also very involved in the decision-making body of the different committees, because the Living Lab members were identified based on, we identified the Living Lab members based on their involvement in farmer organizations and farmers committees. So women were not very involved in these committees, and so in the long run, when you establish a Living Labs, we didn't have enough women involved in the Living Labs. So far, this is what I can say about the Living Labs that we are working on and the activities that are being carried out. Thank you.
Thank you. It sounds very interesting. Such a variety of living labs across several different countries, and yeah, a lot of interesting work. So I'll come back to you with some questions about the about more specifics. But I really enjoyed hearing about what you're doing. And we obviously have some sort of relationship with the project through PrAEctiCe, so it would be neat to visit at some point as well. Let me go on here to Amos. I don't know if Amos, you were driving. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much, Alyssa. The CIRAWA project, that is the agroecological solutions for resilient farming in West Africa. That's for the project. We abbreviated it into the CIRAWA project. Essentially, as Alyssa introduced earlier, it's a consortium of 16 partners drawn from 9 countries, but the actual project implementation or activities is taking place in 4 West African countries. That is Ghana, the Gambia, Cape Verde, and Senegal. So the CIRAWA project, what we are actually, our approach is to adopt the Living Labs approach, which, as the other presenters have already elaborated, we are focusing more on co-creation, blending scientific knowledge with traditional knowledge, what farmers are already used to, and seeing how do we, bring that together in repositioning or positioning agroecology as a central pillar in addressing issues related to climate change. We are looking at 3 key SDGs, that is zero hunger, gender equality, and climate change. So how do we reposition agroecology in such a way that we are able to address these 3 SDGs, especially given the fact that we are approaching 2030, we need to accelerate implementation or activities to addressing or achieving these SDGs. So we are working in all these 4 countries. The main approaches or the strategies we are experimenting with, as Alyssa mentioned earlier, valorization of agroecological or agroecology, valorization of agro waste for bio-based fertilizer production. In this case, again, we are building on what farmers are already doing at the local level, at the community level, because we realized through the baseline study, we realized that farmers are already practicing certain forms of or certain agroecological strategies, only that it is at a rudimentary level. So what we are looking at is what are farmers doing at the community level, and how do we build on that, bridging, again, as I mentioned earlier, the scientific as well as the traditional knowledge. So we are doing valorization of agro waste for bio-based fertilizer production. We are also looking at how do we improve upon quality seed production, especially the local seeds that farmers are used to, so that we are able to ensure that there is, we preserve these seeds and also keep it in the hands of farmers. And then we're also looking at saline soil reclamation, especially through phytoremediation. So these are, this is one of the major strategies that we are looking at in Senegal and the Gambia, these two countries are experiencing acute levels of saline soils. So we're looking at how do we use photoremediation to address these challenges. And then we're also looking at issues related to generally soil fertility, because as we know, West Africa, aside non-sustainable agricultural practices, we know that climate change is accelerating or exacerbating soil fertility related issues. It's exacerbating water access issues, especially for farmers. And then generally we are looking at how do we build on farmers' approach to crop management practices to make sure that we reduce the effect or the impact of some of these non-sustainable practices, climate change on the livelihoods of farmers. So essentially, we are looking at these four core agroecological strategies. That is agro-waste valorization, quality seed development, soil, saline soil reclamation, and then soil fertility through agroecology, through crop management practices. And as I think Alyssa mentioned earlier, we realized that in all of the four countries that we are operating, women have a very unique challenge when it comes to issues related to their contribution to their general contribution to agriculture because of certain cultural, social, economic barriers that women uniquely face in these setups. And then again, we realized that women could at the same time be critical change agents if we are able to integrate them effectively into the transition process or the agroecological transition process. Because we realize that in all four countries, when you look at the role of women in agriculture, women essentially participate in agriculture to produce food for the sustainability of the household. So from that, I mean, only from that perspective, we realize that women are able to adopt agroecological practices because they realize it is something that agroecology is one of the critical tools that would be able to help them to address most of the barriers that they face. And in order to be able to advance their core objective, that is producing food for the consumption or household consumption. So they see it as something that in all the countries that we have engaged in, Cape Verde, Senegal, the Gambia, Ghana, you can see that women feel proud to actually be involved in agroecology because they see it as something that is giving them an opportunity to actually contribute and also advance their core objectives. Just to highlight some of the challenges that women face. I know you are already familiar with them, but just to highlight the context in West Africa. In West Africa, it's not just the financial challenges that women face in general, but it's also the cultural challenges. If you take Ghana, the Gambia, for instance, traditionally in Ghana, women, especially in the northern part of Ghana, women are not allowed to own lands because the inheritance or the traditional setup is such that land is owned through inheritance. And in the northern culture, in the northern Ghana culture, women are not, inheritance is usually limited to the male child. So which means that, in perpetuity, women would not be allowed to own land unless it is given to them by their husband or maybe a relative decide to give them a portion of their lands to be able to farm on. So, just on that premise, it means that all the trainings or the majority of the training or the capacity building that goes to, in the area of agriculture generally benefits men. all the financing that go into agriculture generally benefit men. All the other resources that are allocated to agricultural development generally benefit men, because it is the men who own the land. It is the men who are usually in charge of agricultural production. They are the decision makers. Even at the institutional level, the majority of decisions are related to agriculture is made by men. So these are some of the observations that we made from the baseline study that was carried out in the 4 countries. And so we are taking steps as part of the Living Labs approach to make sure that for every activity, we are integrating, we are ensuring strong participation from our women. And so in each country within CIRAWA, we have 25 selected plots where we are piloting various Living Lab approaches. So in Ghana, for instance, we have 25 Living Labs, Senegal the same, Cape Verde the same, the Gambia the same. And each of these plots, we are approaching it from the perspective of what are the farmers already doing, and how do we learn from them, and how do we also introduce modern or scientific approaches that would enhance what the farmers are already doing. So if you go to northern, one of the project sites in Ghana, for instance, which is the Napdam site, you realize that most of the farmers are already introducing what is called stone bonding, where they are using stones to control erosion on their farms. And this is something that traditionally the farmers are already used to. And again, because women own very small, or women farm are allocated land, their farm plots tend to be very, very small. And so we realize that it is very easy for them to be able to adopt some of these practices. So we realize that if you take stone bonding, for instance, if you take composting, for instance, if you take agroforestry, or the integration farmer-managed agroecological practices, for instance, it is the women who are able to easily adopt it because their farm plots are very small. But when you, at the larger national level, we realize that the majority of the trainings on these practices have generally benefited men. So in each of the project sites, what we are doing is we do the broad capacity building, and then we do a step down gender-focused capacity building specifically for the women. So last year in Ghana, we did, together with C4ICRAF, we did a training on agroforestry, specifically focused on farmer-based, farmer-managed natural regeneration. I realized that the majority of participants that were drawn from the various communities were men. So what we had to do is, based on the same key topics, the same curriculum that was developed together with C4ICRAF, we developed a step-down training specifically for women groups in the Napdam district. And we realized that the women were more open to actually adopt and practice specifically the farmer-based, farmer-managed natural regeneration, for instance. They are more open to adopt composts or biofertilizer production, for instance, because again, because of their socioeconomic limitations. For instance, women don't have the money to be able to go and buy synthetic fertilizers. So this is an opportunity for them. It is something that it will actually benefit. It actually solves the problem that they are having. So they are more open to adopt the production of compost or biofertilizer. They are more open to adopt different crop management practices. They're more open, like mulching, crop rotation and all of that. They're more open to adopt the integration of tree crops on their farms. So these are some of the challenges that we have been experiencing or we have seen as it pertains to what do you call it, agroecological transition. But we are looking at different approaches or different ways that we would be able to adopt or integrate as part of the implementation process to ensure that we place women at the center of agroecological transition. Because as I mentioned earlier, across all the 4 countries, we realize that women could be the catalyst of the changes if we actually strategically reposition them, giving them the resources, the capacity, and again, investing in the local governance structures so that it actually, the local governance structures also open up for women to participate in the decision making processes. So that gradually there will be a cultural shift, a capacity shift, a socioeconomic shift, which are all very important in advancing agroecological transition in West Africa. So so far the experience has been good. We've seen women very open, even though there are still the local governance structure, the local governance, the sociocultural and governance challenges that need to be addressed. I think probably I'll look for any further questions. I'll pick them up. Thank you, Alyssa.
To just say how great it has been today to hear about all these, you know, initiatives. I didn't know a lot about some of the initiatives that are going on, say in Cameroon and Ghana and other places. So this has been really insightful, and it's really great to see so many different projects across a lot of different countries that are really paving the way for women to thrive in agroecology. I really appreciated that everybody took the time to share, and it's been great to hear about projects that are looking for more equitable and inclusive agroecological systems. And yeah, unfortunately, we are so short on time that I had prepared many questions because I have a lot of questions about the information we've heard today, but maybe we need to schedule another seminar where we can have more time for questions and continue this dialogue. I don't know if we can do that, but I think that would be really interesting. Yeah, but I unfortunately, because of the time here, I think I'd like to wrap this up with the hour that we have, and then try to reach out to everyone again for another dialogue in another month or something, because I think this has been really valuable. And yeah, thank you again for everybody for your time and expertise, and everyone who joined us today. And yeah, it was really, really appreciated that you took time out of your day to be here and share. So thank you. Thank you to the organizers as well. We have